Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Sheng. I'm the Distinguished Fellow, Asia Global Institute, University of Hong Kong. And I'm very pleased to give this opening keynote address on positioning Hong Kong for recovery after the great lockdown. Because this is the Risk Hong Kong 2020 conference, I think you would want to know about risks. The context is very simple. We are in the worst pandemic for 100 years, more than 22 million infections, nearly 800,000 deaths, and the virus is not under control. So we're in a sudden stop depression. We have pumped 3 times more monetary and fiscal stimulus since the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And it's very clear that we're in the midst of a trade and tech war. And there's no way anybody can, calculate national security risks at this point of time. Nobody knows how you're going to get caught in the middle. But it's very clear that technology will be the big winner. And I'm going to very quickly summarize. I think East Asia was the first to reopen. And with the weakening dollar, funds will come back to ASEAN +3. So Hong Kong has huge opportunity, but how to make that change is very critical. Now, the first point is that the pandemic has always been a risk that was warned about, but nobody was prepared for it because it just came so fast and so deadly. And if you really look at the likelihood, the World Economic Forum risk assessment in 2020 put infectious diseases as the bottom 10. And if you look at the Towers-Watson risk priorities, global warming was number 1, trade collapse number 2, cyber war number 3, and biodiversity collapse, things like that wasn't even on the horizon. The reality is, of course, we are living in a highly interactive, interconnected, interdependent world. And you as financial experts would know, today there is no free market. It's everything about central banks. Central banks now have reached over 100% of their GDP in most countries, except the Fed, which is roughly 40. And they buy up everything in sight with, whatever it takes. So the market is no longer a free market. The key question, as we all know from risk management point of view, is this strange dilemma in which the real economy is doing terribly and the stock market is at all-time high. And financialization has been the real cause of inequality in the world. And everybody's, the smart money is trying to get out. So what are we really facing? We are seeing huge excess capacities in everything, in labor, in supplies, and also in money. The central banks are printing like crazy. The result is, at the end of this, in the post-COVID world, we're going to see big government and big tech. But unfortunately, 90% of existing workers are not prepared for the digital shift. And so it really depends on who is going to come out of this reasonably well. And those who reform fastest will win. Those who are slow will be marginalized. That part is very clear indeed. Now, within the context of US and China competition, it's very clear also that US leadership depends upon its technology and its dominance in bond and equity markets. But US strength in the financial system depends on very high ROEs. And the ROE depends upon the stock market. And if the stock market, which is at its peak, were to prick for whatever reason, that means the bubble bursts, and the ROE, sharply corrects in a zero interest rate environment, will money still flow to the US? And that reversal, what is going to happen to places like Hong Kong? So we live in a world that is highly leveraged and survived only because of interest rates are zero. And the stock market is completely dependent upon QE, right? It's, you can see the correlation. We've now hit the peak, re-hit the peak in a very strange situation. So now let me, spend, a few minutes talking about Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong is caught in this middle. Hong Kong is typically called the warrant on U.S.-China relations. It's pegged to the Hong Kong dollar pegged to the U.S. dollar has served it extremely well, but the context is changing, and that's sort of thing that we really need to think about. Now, the biggest risk in my view is actually paradigm risk. If you look at the problem wrongly, you're going to get wrong answers, wrong strategy, and then you may end up in a very bad place. So, prior to 2008, everything was free markets, optimal, first best. What Kissinger said, whenever an American look at a foreign policy problem, there is a first best solution to this. But we have now reached what is called quantum politics. Every solution brings new problems. That's the Chinese way of thinking. And as Nassim Taleb says, we are looking not just at black swans, but gray rhinos. That means not just small probability, but very high impact, but you're looking at it in the face and charging at you. And what's charging at us right now is the Thucydides trap between the US and China, and everybody's caught in between. So would the SWOT test or the PEST test work? The old paradigm doesn't work anymore. We are no longer rational. Everything is in the age of anger. And if you really look at Hong Kong, this is a generational fight. The young believe that they are willing to die for their cause. And what you in Hong Kong calls lam chao, if I die, we die together. And so the asymmetric payoffs requires lockdowns. And if you don't lock down, and to that extent, the national security law is seen as a lockdown. So the world is now caught between mutually assured destruction through nuclear war or a burning planet. There are polarized views with no cooperation, and ultimately it's a clash of paradigms or values. So if we were to look at the conventional risk management framework, we completely ignore those black swans, right? The biggest cost to the banking sector and the tech sector is none of the risks that you're talking about, legal risks, compliance risk, etc. It's national security risk. If somebody decides that for national security reasons, you are caught in the middle, you don't know how to price it. One European bank paid 8.9 billion in sanctions. Another bank in the region is still suffering from this. And the sanctions are in the hundreds of billions and may have to close shop even for possibility for some of the tech companies, caught in the middle. Now, some of those extreme scenarios are not out of the calculations. If you go into the IMF study on the public wealth of the US, they did an extreme stress test, and they did not foresee the pandemic, but they said that under the worst adverse scenario, the US can see a net worth decline of up to 54% of GDP. Now, with unemployment already exceeding 15%, and the stock market still at its peak, if the stock market reverses, and the stock market is already 120% of GDP, all this is completely possible. Now, where did Hong Kong miss all this in its understanding? The conventional risk paradigm completely missed the social and wealth inequality amidst the richest city in Asia. Hong Kong is the 4th largest foreign exchange center in the world. Hong Kong government has zero debt. Hong Kong Monetary Authority has $450 billion of reserves to call on to defend its link. But nobody cared about climate change. The technology role was lost to Shenzhen. Hong Kong is the world city, global aspirations, but failed local expectations. High concentration. The young feel the system is rigged. There is a huge cultural identity issue. They're moving from globalism to localism, and it's huge false binaries, we versus them, forgetting all about externalities and entanglement. And so really it's a paradigm failure. The old paradigm doesn't work anymore. So let me do a very simple PEST analysis. This PEST stands for political, economic, social technology, basically what is called SWOT, systemic strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And if you look at it from an investor perspective, Hong Kong as a warrant for US-China is either a better tomorrow or a dystopian future. So if you look at pluses, if Hong Kong is politically neutral, it can also go what is called anocracy. I'll explain that later. And if China prospers, there are huge upsides. On the other negative side, it could get into a huge electoral democracy swamp of toxic politics, continued protests, and recession or depression to marginalization. So these are the polarized perspectives involved. Now, where Hong Kong made a mistake was that in 1997, nobody thought through possible roads to 2047, which is when the one country, two systems finishes. The first form of electoral democracy, which is the US bi-party system, ended up with financial capitalism, but highly unequal, okay? Then there is anocracy, which is democracy with autocratic features, which is the Singapore model in a very simplistic way. And there is socialism in housing, open markets, but dominated by government-linked corporations. But Hong Kong people said, no, we are better than Singapore. You know, we reject this. The third one is, of course, the autocratic, which is the mainland model, and it's socialism with Chinese characteristics. But Hong Kong people say, we're superior to them also. And then, of course, there is the neutral model, which is the Swiss model, high tax on the rich, but market friendly. But that was not adopted. So where's the good story? Well, if you look at McKinsey's study on China and the world, which is a very, very important study, and you should, read it. China is deeply integrated into the global system, but its actual integration is actually declining because of the US-China issues. As China grows, it actually has a very large domestic consumption model that may not completely need the world as much. So the trade war is not hurting China as much. And actually, McKinsey thinks that there is 22 to 37 trillion upside from the greater China growth story, which is huge, and Hong Kong can take advantage of that. Now, if you then look at what is happening over the long term, and you see that China and India, the middle class is happening, and if they move without war into a middle income, high value situation, this will transform global asset management markets. And Hong Kong is in the middle of playing this game if it knows how to take advantage of that. So Hong Kong as a trade, financial, and information hub is a spoke into China, US, and Southeast Asia. It's, after all, the capital of overseas Chinese. Many overseas Chinese, all over the world, in Latin America, in Asia, in the Pacific, even in England, Australia, Canada, they still keep accounts in Hong Kong. But Hong Kong's been very much focused on the mainland. And it built the supply chain very, very well, and built very smart city infrastructure and connectivity. But now it's caught between US, China, and the national security risk is unpriceable. You don't know how to price this because, if you have an account that is with somebody who's sanctioned, how do you deal with this? Do you close the account? If you don't close the account, do you subject to sanctions, etc.? And then if doxing and personal safety is an issue, can Hong Kong play the old role? Hence the national security law. So there are very hard choices for the business community. It's all about politics. It's all about emotion. It's not about rationality these days. And to a large extent, business community cannot ignore the politics of it all. And so you either sell out, you move out of Hong Kong, you reinvent your business model, or you muddle through. And of course, all these are possible, but it depends upon a lot of issues. So let me quickly summarize. I think what I'm trying to say is that the old paradigm, which was based upon the free market model paradigm, is gone. It's gone because we've moved away from a unipolar system in which the big power dominated all the rules to a multipolar system in which the rules are now being shaped by different players. And because that is happening, there's a shift in the order. Chaos reigns at this stage. The old system is dying, the new system is emerging. And therefore, there are a lot of black swans and fat tail risks that we have not used very carefully, because all our current models are based on bell curve, sort of stochastic stuff. That doesn't work. We know it doesn't work, but we don't know what the alternative model is. Nassim Taleb, in my view, is correct. We need to move towards anti-fragile resilience and adaptivity, which means that we have to have larger cushion than before. But as you know, on a debt strategy, where debt is now growing bigger, from 150% of GDP now to nearly 300% of GDP post-crisis, we are facing a world that is more angry, more fragile, more fragmented, more emotional rather than rational. And what is emerging? Very clearly, governments are so large now. Government is intervening in everything. And that's needed because we need governments to protect us. And a lot of businesses are going to go under. People don't have jobs. And governments will be important. But at the same time, because everything has moved online, COVID has shifted more and more work online. They're going to be winners. But we don't have a paradigm that knows how to take care of the bottom half of society over the long term. Now, rich cities like Hong Kong have much more capacity than the many in the rest of the world who are now going to be brought into poverty. But if the coronavirus resides in these communities, and through global trade and migration and travel, we all get reinfected again, we're all going to have another crash. So in a sense, the COVID world has created a world with asymmetric payoffs. One small virus can bring out the whole system. One individual can take down the whole system through hacking, through exactly what happened during the First World War, when a guy decided to assassinate an Austrian leader, and then caused the First World War. So, people are willing to take big risks for big payoffs, and that explains to me why everybody is speculating in the stock market. Because if the governments are paying us zero interest rates, we are going to go through major difficulties, and so everybody's speculating that they're going to get out before the whole thing comes down. So my basic view is that Hong Kong has huge opportunities, but how she manages will depend upon the wisdom of the community to work together. If it doesn't work together, then the chances may be lost. Hong Kong's advantages are Hong Kong's to lose, not necessary for others to take. That's a strategy game. And on that note, let me stop here and wish your conference every success. Thank you very much indeed.